yourselves a round of applause because you guys are the heroes today. Round of applause. You guys are fighting addiction. I'm not sure if you can hear me out there. You guys are fighting addiction. There is no bigger monster in town. And we are a community that needs a lot of healing, right? We went out and reached out to our leaders, and we discovered that basically we got to fight for ourselves and put some tribes together. We got Naranon, we got NA, we had, Brian's Hope with Jeannie, we got FAN. These are all grassroots organizations that are actually making a difference. And if you talk about this opioid crisis, when the historians go back and they revisit this and say, hey, what happened with the government and the people and all this? There's going to be stories of people that are in this room that made a difference, fighting addiction on a one-on-one level, maybe on a policy level, or maybe just in a family level. And we need more heroes in America today. And you guys are all heroes, so thank you for being here. Thank you for your time, and we're going to get moving. This is dedicated to, did anybody know Jeannie Richards? All right, so this is dedicated to Jeannie. Let's rock and roll. What should I say first? All right, let's start off with a story about a loser. Let's hear about a loser, right? So we got a loser. This kid is 16 years old. He's got 4 felony convictions. He's in Children's Village. He is now a teen father. He's starts to use heroin, overdosed 24 times to the hospital. Who's betting on that guy to win? Anybody betting on him to win? Thank you. Somebody sees that, right? But some people have to be honest about this, and you go talk about, when that person, ends up being me. That person is me. 24 overdoses to the hospital, 12 times saved by Narcan. People talk about, this Narcan thing, how that come out. We talk about having the first responders having this and giving people second and third chances. I was never the person that was expected to be a recovery story of success. Make sure it's very clear. That was never what happened. Even in the meetings in NA, people would kind of go, that's the guy that never gets it. That's the guy that keeps relapsing. That's the guy that's not taking it seriously. And so when I went to Brighton Hospital this last time around, and I'm in there doing the intake, and I'm very, very sick, and the nurse looks at me, she goes, you understand you're a severe heroin addict. You're an IV drug user. There's less than a 5% chance you'll ever get sober. Think about that. But this time I was defiant. And I go, those are fantastic odds. I feel fantastic today. Thank you for telling me that. No, did you hear me? Only 5%. And I said, 5% is all that I need. And proving the point. We love our turnaround stories, okay? And so with my story regards to, being a person that turns things around, I got a chance to basically call myself an addiction killer. That's a really bold statement, right? Who calls themselves an addiction killer? Unless you can kind of back that stuff up with some commensurate abilities. But I can though, see? I graduated from U of M with a master's degree in a 4.0, right? I'm a licensed master's level therapist. I got a TED Talk. I've written a book on addiction, which is kind of cool, right? And also I've been on the cover of the Detroit News and also the New York Times. Remember, this is the same guy that was never supposed to make it. The same guy that was never supposed to turn things around. And so my success is your success. And talking about becoming a therapist, it's a brief story. I'd already gotten sober, and my friend Jerry was still doing heroin. And sad to say, he was married to Kimmy. We all kind of grew up together. And I get a phone call from Kimmy on the phone, and Kimmy goes, Raj, I got bad news. Jerry died of an overdose in the Chrysler stamping plant. I'm like, Kimmy, this is so bad. And she goes, well, no, the story gets worse. I go, what do you mean the story gets worse? She goes, I'm pregnant and I'm doing heroin too. Jerry lied to me. He told me he would never give his wife heroin. That's breaking the rules of the game. And he did that. And I said, I'll be over there in 40 minutes. I took her to her first NA meeting. We went through boxes of Kleenex crying together, the pain, the emotions. And, together as a team, we stayed sober, she stayed sober, and had a healthy baby. At some point in the future, I'm there at St. Anastasia's Church for the Godfather ceremony, and she's, carrying the baby, still has her wedding band on. And the priest looks at me and goes, who are you? And I go, I'm the Godfather. He looks at her and goes, where's the father at? Seeing the wedding band. And she looks down and she goes, well, he can't be here today. And the priest is not picking up on this. He's an elderly guy, and he goes, what are you talking about? This is one of the most important days of this Christian child's life. And Kimmy begins sobbing uncontrollably and says he can't be here today because he died of a heroin overdose. And that's when I had my friend Kimmy holding onto my arm. My sleeve is soaking wet with her tears. and I'm in a rage. Like I want someone to feel my pain. I want to put my hands on somebody so they can understand what this feels like. But then I had an epiphany. It's kind of nice that you got sober, Raj. That's kind of a nice thing. But what about, becoming a therapist and getting other people sober? Maybe even becoming an interventionist. Made up my mind to go to graduate school from that point forward, and the rest is what I'm doing now. We got to turn lemons into lemonade. And so, it was never the plan, trust me. I was never supposed to be a therapist before. I was supposed to be all kinds of things. I was in lots of rock bands. Those things didn't work out either. But this was the plan all along, but I just kind of got lost in the process. So we're talking about being an addiction killer and what goes along with that. And so when I wrote this book on addiction, it's available, and it's very popular in jails and prisons. I'm gonna brag to you guys. I got a letter from a guy that was in Jackson prison, and he got my book. He goes, "This is the only book I've ever read cover to cover." That's a really big deal. That's a really big deal to me. But at Brighton Hospital, there was one point where the medical director, I'm not gonna say any names, was being given money by Reckitt and Benkheiser. So they're the guys that make the Suboxone pills, right? And they gave him a $120,000 check because he was a thought leader in the field of addiction. So one day, the staff's reading my book, and the part about Suboxone says, which is true, it's a Schedule III controlled narcotic, and it has addictive properties, and it's addictive. And he goes, "You can't say that. There's no withdrawals from Suboxone." And I said, "Well, have you ever taken it?" Because I have, and that's not what I felt. He goes, "You got to remove that part of your book." And I go, "I'm not really feeling like I'm going to be doing that." He goes, "Then we're banning your book from Brighton Hospital." See, I didn't know what that actually meant. What it meant was when clients of mine would go into Brighton Hospital and go through the admissions department, a security guard would go through their stuff and take this book out and remove it and say, "You can't have this until you get out of Brighton." Is that normal? Does that show you who shapes decision-making and policy-making? Like Reckitt and Benkheiser is that powerful? They're going to tell you what books to have? They also had an idea about having people actually from NA, this was one of their goals, that were going to be taught about Suboxone and then would be put to NA meetings to tell everybody that Suboxone and abstinence are the same thing, right? And they were doing that at NA meetings until the NA people at Brighton said, "You can't bring your people over here and seat our NA audience with these, policy views." Remember, NA traditions, right? No viewpoints on outside matters. That's why NA is so golden and so awesome, one of the many reasons, right? And so long story short, just 6 months ago, medical staff has changed, and my book is back in Brighton Hospital in the bookstore, coming full circle, for what it's worth. So I want to talk about the idea behind the disease of addiction. And this is kind of like information you probably know already, but I'm going to hammer this home because it's so important to me. When we're dealing with social media and people in social media, oftentimes they'll say, "Well, it's a choice." Well, if I keep coughing on you and wink and smile and say, "Don't catch a cold," does that feel like a choice? Look, I'm all about the idea that a person, once they have this disease, needs to get help and they have to act accordingly and be responsible and deal with their disease. Like, think about it. The HIV virus is a disease that you can get. And if you have HIV, you can't run around not treating and give it to other people. It's actually illegal to do that. So same idea about the disease of addiction. I'm not saying that it frees you from accountability, but when people get really honest, like when an airplane crashes to the ground, like when somebody overdoses or dies or becomes a heroin addict, if everybody really gets honest about that, there's a whole bunch of blame to go around, right? It's not just one person, because I didn't bring any heroin into America. I didn't do that, right? I didn't launder any money for the cartels. I didn't do that, right? So how'd that stuff get here, and why is it so prevalent? I do have some positive information. For the first time ever, I was going to tell you guys that the whole thing about China and the fentanyl and how no one ever goes to prison in China. Well, I don't know how long we've had this opioid crisis for about 10 years now, right? The first time ever, the Chinese government has actually arrested some people for selling fentanyl to Americans, and one guy got a suspended death sentence. I don't understand what that even means, because usually in China, they just kill you anyway. So someone said it's 2 years of letting everybody kind of calm down and then freeing him from his sentence. But it has actually happened the first time ever. They actually arrested about 3 people, and they gave them some real sentences for selling fentanyl to Americans. And think about that. As far as like illegal drug overdoses, 80% are usually involving fentanyl. And the fentanyl comes from China. Even when the cartels get their fentanyl, it comes from China. You guys hear about the seizure by the Mexican Navy? They got a shipment of fentanyl that got caught on a boat on the way to Sinaloa drug cartel. Please tell me this is going to impress you. It was enough fentanyl in that boat to kill 94% of the world's population in one single dose. Please say you're impressed. Come on, that's a big shipment, right? But the worst part of this story, after the boat was seized, the price of fentanyl didn't change. Wow, right? And you guys also know about El Chapo's son being arrested, right? You're following this, right? So they arrested El Chapo's son because he took over from his father. And after they arrested him, what happened? His private army began shooting everything up. And the Mexican police said, you get to go home. We can't deal with this. So when Americans are talking about this addiction crisis, we didn't make this on our own. To be honest about that, we're responsible for fixing it. But when you get really honest about where this goes, this is global, and there's plenty of people to blame, right? We bring it back about the idea about being a disease. So has anyone ever heard about addiction being a disease, like at an NA meeting or at a conference, right? So it sounds pretty, what does that actually mean, a disease? Let's go with the AMA. It means it's got symptoms and it's treatable. So if someone was to tell you, I have a really bad flu, and they got it right in front of you, what would you look for to see if they're actually telling you the truth? Sneezing, coughing, right? So we got physical symptoms. What about addiction? Does addiction have physical symptoms? Right. Withdrawals, using, right? We can talk about people that have been using for a period of time may not look so good or dress so good or smell so good. What about mental symptoms of addiction? Possibly causing anxiety, causing depression. Maybe you got PTSD before you got your addiction, and then in your active addiction you got more PTSD, so you got to do more drugs to get the PTSD to go away, right? I'm talking about other mental health issues, self-medicating. What about legal symptoms of addiction? Isn't there a jail around here somewhere, Macomb County Jail? Do people go there to die? Did I say that out loud? Do people go to that jail to die for petty charges? Is that true? Is that true? Anybody Google that? Check that out? Right. How is that even a thing? What about financial symptoms of addiction? We got $200 in our pocket, and we got a phone bill, and we got a light bill, and we got a dope man. Who gets paid first? How'd you guys know that? You read my mind? How do you guys? That's amazing. Okay, what about spiritual symptoms of addiction, right? Raised in a really good Catholic household, right? Good mom and dad. Got prescribed too many pills for surgery, right? How'd she become a prostitute? How'd that happen? That's not supposed to happen, right? We talk about moral decay, the spiritual decay. The flu is very easy to treat. It only has physical symptoms. Addiction is very difficult to treat. It has physical, mental, spiritual, financial, legal, and a whole bunch of other symptoms all going on simultaneously. But the main symptom of addiction, this is important, is the inability to get high successfully. That is not a challenge. So don't go out and say, I got this guy beat. I'm gonna go out there and get high a whole bunch of times and not get this problem. No, please don't do that. What I'm saying is that when a person has crossed the line into addiction, we see a pattern of failure, unfulfilled obligations, irresponsibility, right? We see how it's taking them away. Also, the reference can be, it's like a zombie son or a zombie daughter. They're physically present, but they're emotionally unavailable. And that's the spiritual theft of addiction. It steals people that we love from right in front of us. And that's why part of it's why it's so evil. You know, I'm not saying there's demons and angels, but if there are, I mean, sure, addiction would be classified as a pretty bad demon, right? I mean, it turns, kids into orphans, right? It turns moms and dads into bank robbers and prostitutes, and it breaks the moral decay of our society, and it fragments people up, causes all kinds of pain and anguish. So people that are in this room who are part of Naranon or NA and trying to fight this good battle, I mean, you're on this side of righteousness. What can be more honorable than that, than fighting this big monster that came into town? There's no dragons to slay, right? But there's a big addiction monster running around harming people that we care about. So